Today we're in Psalm 107. I want you to, before we read the psalm, I want you to listen to how the psalmist ends this psalm and let this kind of shape how we listen and think about what the psalmist has to say. In verse 43, the very last verse of this psalm, it's a long one, the psalmist says, "Whoever is wise, let him attend to these things. Let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord." And so there's this call, a call towards wisdom. And he says, let the wise ones pay attention to something that's going on in these series of stories, series of kind of narratives that the psalmist is going to set up as he extols or kind of explains the work of God in redeeming and rescuing people who are in trouble. But he tells us, he commends to us, pay attention to these, attend to these things. And the thing that you should see, kind of tying all of these narratives together, is the steadfast love of the Lord. As you pay attention to these stories, as we listen to them right now, I want us to consider, to think about the nature of the covenant love of God and how it works for and towards his people. So Psalm 107. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble and gathered in from the lands, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south. Some wandered in desert ways, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way till they reached a city to dwell in. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons, for they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of the Most High. So he bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death, and burst their bonds apart. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he shatters the doors of bronze and cuts in two the bars of iron. Some were fools through their sinful ways, and because of their iniquities suffered affliction. They loathed any kind of food, and they drew near to the gates of death. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them, and delivered them from their destruction. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. And let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving, and tell of his deeds and songs of joy. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men, and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storms be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let them extol him in the congregation of the people, and praise him in the assembly of the elders. He turns rivers into a desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste, because of the evil of its inhabitants. He turns a desert into pools of water, a parched land into springs of water, and there he lets the hungry dwell, and they establish a city to live in. They sow fields and plant vineyards and get a fruitful yield. By his blessing they multiply greatly, and he does not let their livestock diminish. When they are diminished and brought low through oppression, evil, and sorrow, he pours contempt on princes and makes them wander in trackless wastes. But he raises up the needy out of affliction and makes their families like flocks. The upright see it and are glad, and all wickedness shuts its mouth. Whoever is wise, let him attend to these things. Let them consider the steadfast love of the Lord. And here we have a series of cyclical patterns that walk through this psalm. And the psalmist tells us to pay attention to them, to look at actually what's unfolding in all of these. In all of them, you have a certain set of circumstances brought about simultaneously by the hand of God, and through generally either the trouble or someone goes sailing, and sailing, it always leads to trouble. On account of at least two of them, it's directly connected to sin. In other words, it's just people that are wandering, that find themselves in a set of circumstances that are difficult, that they find themselves landless. And then last, you see a set of circumstances where they've gone out to sea. And then beginning in verse 33, the psalmist then begins to summarize all that he said, kind of 33 through 42, summarizing the things that we should be observing and paying attention to. The first thing I just want to draw our attention to is how active God is in this psalm. As we've spent the last month kind of working day by day, having to make reflections on the Psalms, it struck me how active God is, how nothing happens by mere circumstance or chance. That the psalmist worldview, the Christian worldview, the way that we understand what's happening in the world is that God is constantly at work. He is constantly active. He is moving this way, moving that way. He's raising up princes, raising up kings, putting down kingdoms. He's bringing judgment on some. He's bringing chastisement and discipline to others. He's bringing rescue to those who are poor. He's bringing down those who are oppressing the poor. He's constantly moving and working and acting. He's not the God of kind of modern deism, this God who's distant, but rather the God that we pray to, the God that we sing to and worship and praise isn't only the God who's rescued us and redeemed us through the great redemptive act of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. But he's actually now at work day by day by day in the minuscule circumstances of our lives, acting providentially and sovereignly to chastise us, to heal us, to redeem us, to give us rest, to bring us out of rest into places of trouble. And bringing us out of trouble, he's constantly at work. And one of the beautiful things I see in this psalm is whether the circumstances were brought on by sin, or because they went out to do business on the sea, or whether they're just wandering in the desert, God hears the cries of his people. You see, the nature of God's covenant love for us is not that he waits for us to kind of attain to some certain level of righteousness, but all he waits for is a cry for help and for mercy. That there is at the heart of God's steadfast covenant love. And this really is the heart of the gospel. That he is moving and he's working in such a way to bring us always over and over and over again to a place where we can recognize our absolute dependency on him, our need of his mercy, our need of his grace, his rescue, his help, that he would sustain us. I actually resonate with this story of the man who goes out on his boat on the sea, and one minute they're up on the heights, the next one they're down in the depths. I was out on a training vessel, and it was in the North Atlantic, and there was a pretty, what seemed like a pretty terrible storm. I found out later it was a pretty lame storm. But our ship was relatively small, and we're out at sea, and these waves are crashing. It's the middle of the night. I'm on watch that night, so I'm on the main deck. We're having to somehow chart a course through all of this, and the boat is literally just rocking up and down and up and down. And 1 second you're having to walk uphill to get to one side of the bridge, and then the next minute you're walking to the other side, and the boat's going up and down in every direction, and pretty soon everyone who's awake at that point is throwing up, and so you're literally, there's a door on either side of the bridge, and so you'd walk up one side, hang over the edge, throw up, and have to hurry and walk back the other way so that you wouldn't be kind of off the bottom of the boat as it's tilting this way. And I remember multiple times and I'm thinking how on earth do we go on? And it's in moments like that in our lives where everything just feels like, what in the world is happening right now? I can barely stand on my feet. I'm sick. I don't know what to do. It's those places where God calls us to cry out to him, to recognize our dependence on him. In those places where you feel like you're at the end of your rope in the nature of sin. I think the temptation in those moments is saying, man, through my own righteousness, my own good works, my own wisdom, my own working hard, I'm going to kind of pull myself up up by my own bootstraps. And then I can go to God. Not in this psalm. The psalmist says the steadfast love of God is such that at the very bottom you cry out to God and he hears you. Or maybe your own foolishness has gotten you into all kinds of trouble. Maybe enormous amounts of debt or all kinds of other problems. And we think, man, if I can just work hard enough, I can just kind of make wise decisions moving forward, then I can figure this out on my own. That's not what the psalmist says. He says, in that place, we're to cry out to God for help. That's not to be anti-wisdom or anti-repentance and turning away from sin. But it is to say, at the very nature of what it means to be the people of God, it's not that we figure things out on our own and thereby prove ourselves to God, but in our darkest places, in our most confusing places, in our most nauseous places, we cry out to God and he hears us. He rescues us. And in many, many places in our life, he has sovereignly brought us to that moment on purpose. He intentionally brings us to that place so that we might cry out to him. So may you cry out to him in the darkness, under the weight of your own guilt and shame, in the places where your own foolish decisions have led you into in a place of crisis, or maybe just like life feels crazy. In those places, may you cry out to him, knowing that he is at work in all of it, so that you will cry out to him.